Morning, everyone. It's Joe Waxman, and I'm back with another video. This morning, I would like to look at singer, songwriter, icon, punk rock icon, John Lydon, or more commonly known as Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols fame. When I was a kid, I, by kid, I mean when I was like a teenager, I guess, like 15 through 20, I was really into punk. And the Sex Pistols were one of my early influences. I'm going to share the screen. Yeah, so like I did listen to the Sex Pistols a lot. Later, I dropped the Sex Pistols and got into more modern punk influences. But I originally did listen to the Sex Pistols. I thought they were cool, pre-revolutionary. And one of the interesting things about it is that punk rock got its popularity right around the time I was born. I was born in '76, and I included the transits in '76, not my birthday, but just now I just turned it back to '76, so you can see what the influences were that gave rise to the punk rock image and movement and politics and all that. Look at that. And that's interesting that there was sort of a strong revival, like 15, right around 15 to 20 years after the punk rock fame. And I think that's always going to happen, because you're going to have the kids who were born at that time who really take on the energy. They grow up, they turn into teenagers, then they revive the style that was popular when they were born. We didn't know that we were doing this. It was just unconscious, right? Because we had that energy in our own astrological DNA. And the three main transits obviously are the three outer planets that form that. It was Pluto in Libra, Uranus in Scorpio, and Neptune in Sag. And I have all three of those in my natal birth chart. But before we get into John Lydon, Johnny Rotten's astrology, I just want to read just a quote, just to give you an idea of what it was like if you're not really familiar with the punk movement or Johnny Rotten, the Sex Pistols, all that. It's this: the other squatters hated us. He was a squatter before the Sex Pistols, because the way we looked, short cropped hair and old suits. That's when Sid Vicious started to come around to my way of fashion. Sid Vicious was the bassist. I gave him his first decent haircut. It's funny he calls it first decent haircut, which was the punk style. As it soon became, you literally cut chunks of hair out of your head. The idea was to not have any shape to your hairdo, just have it fucked up. That was the beginning of it all. That's fascinating to me. I mean, just because that was actually before the Sex Pistols were a band. They were just a fashion, a style, an icon, like an image, right? And then Sid Vicious on Johnny Rotten. Lydon, during this stage of his life, was described by Vicious as the vilest geezer I ever met. All misshapen, no air, hunchback, flat feet. It's funny as hell. Because the thing is that the punk rock was actually like the style was actually born in New York, and then Malcolm McLaren imported it over to England. But what's interesting is if you read that, they were already into the punk fashion. I mean, the fashion, the style, that whole thing was already there, because the planets, these transits were, this was, I think, probably like 1975. Anyway, these transits were just starting to have the influence on people everywhere. So it wasn't, I saw this interview where they were arguing over like where, punk, started, and like a lot of them were like, it started in New York, and then John Lydon was like, no, it really started in England or something like that. Like he was making a case for that because, well, for him, he probably didn't get his punk style from New York. Anyway, You know, there's a lot of parallels there, but that's another story. Let's look at his astrology. So Sun in Aquarius, second moving to the third house, second house being dealing with voice, third house dealing with expression. So I mean, this is perfect, right? You know, he's a singer, maybe not a very good one, but definitely a very unique one, and very strong frontman personality. It's conjunct Chiron and Mercury. So Chiron conjunct the sun can make somebody very defensive, very hypersensitive, very protective, and he was initially. And they just have this very they come off kind of aggressive because they're so hyper defensive that they can appear aggressive, especially when young. Because that Chiron's like an open wound, and you know, if you're walking around with an open wound, you're going to defend it. You're not going to let anyone like poke at it, you know, with their dirty hands, and you know, it's just a very sensitive position to be. Sometimes these people can go on to become healers. I don't know if John Lydon's a healer, but he's still remained like in the limelight, in the spotlight. Like people still consider, you know, him to be something, you know. Mercury's also here, making him very intellectual. And what I like about the Sex Pistols, John Lydon, is that they were political. They weren't just, you know, what you call pop punk. It wasn't just about like, you know, like, not to diss the Ramones or anything, because it's a whole, I mean, but it wasn't just about the music. Like let's, for instance, the Ramones, like, you know, the Ramones did not have a integrity, you know, it was just like fashion. It was pop. It wasn't anything revolutionary. What made punk rock revolutionary is that it stood for something. You know, it wasn't just about the music. It wasn't just about the fucked up hairdos and, you know, leather jackets and, you know, being all rowdy and chaotic and, you know, giving your finger to everyone, basically. It was, if we look at the transits, Pluto was in Libra, right? Libra is all about peace and balance and fairness and justice and equality. And Pluto is destroying all that because Pluto wants the evolution. So first it destroys. So it's destroying the peace. It's destroying the balance. It's destroying the, it's going to extremes, because Pluto and Libra are quite opposite. Like Libra wants things to be like very copacetic, balanced, equal. Pluto wants to go like to the depths. It just doesn't even care. It's like, fuck balance. We're going to the extremes. We're going all the way, you know, like it's complete opposite of balance. So it's, people don't really speak very well of Pluto and Libra, but it's actually a really powerful combination. Not so much for Pluto, but for Libra. For all the things that Libra represents, Pluto just fucks it up, you know, like destroys all that superficial bullshit. Because Libra, if there's one thing that we can criticize, there's probably a lot of things that we can criticize about Libra, but one of the things that we can criticize about Libra is that in its attempts to create peace, it can become superficial, right? If you're just like constantly glossing over all the problems in order to keep the peace, you end up being superficial. Pluto is like, no, fuck that. We're destroying all the peace. We're getting rid of all that superficial bullshit Libra stuff to get down to something real, right? Because that's what Pluto wants. It wants the depth. It wants real. It wants the authenticity. So we're going for some real justice, you know, and that punk rock had the balls to call out the fake bullshit in society. You know, all the, you know, it was about, you know, the Sex Pistols were very revolutionary in that they called for anarchy, like wide open, like Anarchy in the UK. That was their big hit, right? Right in their first album. It was like right up front, like no messing around. It wasn't like subtle innuendos of anarchist tones, you know. It was like, you know, never mind the Bullocks. Here's the Sex Pistols. What was their #1 song? Basically Anarchy in the UK. And I am an anarchist. You know, so bold, so in your face, right? Pluto and Libra. Uranus in Scorpio. Right now we have Uranus in Taurus. It's boring, it's dull. Uranus in Scorpio is fantastic. And one of the things, I mean, I get excited about John Lydon punk rock because, I mean, I have these positions, so it's very natural for me. It's very natal. I have Uranus and Scorpio conjunct my ascendant, right? And one of the things that they popularized was this hairdo, like the mohawk, right? The only other iterance we have of the mohawk that I'm aware of is there was a certain, like the Native Americans would do that, but they didn't stand it up on its end like the punks did. The punks would do the mohawk and stand it up in spikes, right? Vertically, all like that. We all know what a mohawk looks like. And why is that significant? Well, if you look at Uranus basically has a mohawk because it has the Saturnian rings, but it's vertical. So, I mean, it's amazing. It's uncanny that Uranus in Scorpio, where a lot of people consider it exalted because it's so powerful, that the punk rock, the people who started the whole movement with Uranus and Scorpio. So really, Uranus and Scorpio is the main representative of punk rock. And their signature hairstyle was, well, the spikes, the Johnny Rotten, Sid Vicious hairdo with the spikes all around. But then secondarily, after that, we got the mohawk, right? That was signature punk rock. I had a mohawk when I was a kid. I had a double mohawk too. But that's Uranus. That's Uranian influence in Scorpio. And why is Uranus and Scorpio so powerful? Because Scorpio rules the Pluto. It's the Plutonic influence. It rules the depth. It's really about the depth, the penetration, the destruction, the depth of perception. Everything deep is Scorpio, right? So we can think of like deep roots, right? And then Uranus is about the outward expansion, the explosion, right? You can see it in the hair. The mohawk with the actual physical representation of Uranus, and then the spikes everywhere. That's the energetic representation of Uranus, because Uranus is that thunderbolt that explodes outwardly. So here you have the depth of awareness and the expansion of awareness both present with Uranus and Scorpio. It's very powerful. It's very dynamic. Both ruled by both having an outer planet influence. Scorpio is co-ruled by Mars and Pluto. So here we have Uranian and Plutonic Pluto influence together, Uranus and Pluto together, right? And that's extremely powerful. We saw that in the 60s when Uranus and Pluto actually came together in Virgo. But here we're having a similar kind of thing with just Uranus and Scorpio, that really powerful dynamic influence that destroys. They both destroy in different ways. Like Uranus just like, Pluto like just goes to the depths and crumbles the core integrity, and it's like burning it up from the core, from the inside out. And Uranus is that explosion, right? Uranus is like a bomb going off, or a lightning striking. It's just mass expansion, right? And then you have the Neptune in Sag, which is very philosophical, very spiritual, very high-minded, right? Neptune and Jupiter together create a very Piscean feel, but it's dynamic, it's nuanced, it's interesting, very imaginative, but very high philosophy as well. So you combine that, and then you get a feel for punk rock. So anyway, Johnny Rotten with this strong Aquarius, 3 planets in Aquarius, well, 4 if you count Pallas Athena in. By the way, Pallas Athena goes great when it's conjunct Mercury. I have that combination, that conjunction, because if you look at the mythology, Hermes worked with Pallas Athena to help Perseus defeat Medusa. And they both have a similar way of going about it. Hermes is the intellect, and Pallas Athena is the strategy and the wisdom. So it provides a very strong intellect when they're together. And Chiron also is very wise. If he can get past his own wounds, if he can heal himself, right? That's always the trick with Chiron. Whenever you see Chiron in the chart, if it's making like difficult aspects or any touching personal planets, the trick is for Chiron to heal. Then it's a great asset, because then it has compassion, empathy, wisdom, teaching ability, healing ability. That's the main thing, healing ability. It's just a very wise planet, or planetoid, asteroid, basically, to have. It's powerful. It's big for an asteroid, so it's one of the main out of all the asteroid non-planets, it's one of the main ones. So this is really strong in rebellious Aquarius. I mean, Aquarius is the, co-ruled by Uranus. So we're getting a lot of that. We're getting that rebellion. Aquarians are so rebellious. Not only that, it's opposite. Mercury's opposite Uranus here, adding another level of brilliance and rebellion. Eighth house, destruction. Similar theme because, eighth house, Scorpio, Uranus is in, Scorpio at that time. So it's activating because the eighth house, Scorpio, Uranus, water. So still similar, right? We're getting a similar feel to his nature, his natal Uranus in the eighth house. It's activating that at that time. When Uranus moved into Scorpio, he was like, this is my time to shine, because his natal Uranus is in the eighth house. So it's similar energy in a water sign, Cancer. Okay. Mercury opposite Uranus is going to make him very argumentative, but very brilliant at the same time, because oppositions are always about other people. So whenever, he was like engaging with others, it would activate this intellect versus rebellion and high, high awareness, like brilliant outside of the box kind of Uranian thinking. And that's it can often be quite argumentative with Uranus involved, because Uranus is just, it always wants to expand the awareness. So it's always looking to sort of counter any argument with something even bigger and broader and more out of the box. It's, that's kind of its nature, even if it's not like trying to, it doesn't want to agree. Uranus doesn't mind being alone in its viewpoints. It doesn't mind being independent. It doesn't mind, in fact, it needs it. That's what it craves. That's what it wants. So therefore, you're always going to get a sort of argumentation with Uranus, because it's always going to want to be alone with the higher view, with the more expanded view. So it's always like, trying to come up with something that's even more out of the box, more original, more unique, more independent. And in the eighth house, it's quite powerful, quite destructive, because, it has some of that Pluto energy, right? That Uranus and Scorpio. That's quite strong, right? We have the moon in Virgo. I have moon in Virgo. Here is conjunct the MC, so that's really powerful for recognition, fame, being in the spotlight. Virgo moon can be a pain in the ass, because it's just so like, it's great in one sense because it's so organized. Like you don't let your emotions rule you. You can with Virgo moon, you can really organize your emotions. And that's one of the best things about it, because you're not letting yourself be ruled by emotions. You're using that critical intellect to reorganize the emotions, and then you become very focused in your thinking, and very critical of others, because they're not going to do as nearly as good a job as you are, at least according to the Virgo moon, about pretty much anything. I mean, maybe not anything, but a lot of things. Let's put it that way. Anyway, Virgo moon's very critical, but an evolved Virgo moon will really have good thinking and organizational skills and ability to have the ability to criticize constructively, right? It can be it can be a huge asset. Remember, because Virgo's the virgin and moon's the mother. So here we have, in its highest evolution, the virgin mother, right? There's something very pure about Virgo moons, something very potentially even spiritual. Not saying that he is spiritual, but I mean, he has a lot of integrity even to this day. I mean, he's never changed his politics. He's always said, "I'm for the people, not for the government," and he's always kept that. And it couldn't even be more true to this day. Like, it's not gotten any less true. That's even more true right now than it ever was. Like, all the people of the world are suffering at the hands of all the governments. Like, all the governments are just shit. They're all corrupt. They're all liars. They're all, totalitarian, fascist dictators wanting to, enslave all of humanity. Don't get me started, but I'm right there with him. He's 100% right about that the governments have always been the problem, and they're always trampling the people. And it's not about political left or right or whatever. It's about that point that are in our modern world, the governments are really just the problem, and that no amount of, there's all these bands, and like the modern trend of like socialism has come in, but socialism is just dressed up fascism. It really is. It's nothing better. It's tyranny, it's top-down rule, it's slavery, it's just the worst. And so he's always kept his integrity about that. A lot of times you get like these punk rockers who are like, oh, capitalism's the problem. Capitalism is not a thing. It's not an idea. It's not something that somebody invented. Marxism and socialism is. Capitalism is free trade. We can talk about crony capitalism and all that, but anyway, that's another tangent. Anyway, there's nothing wrong with free trade. But his moon has a nice sextile from Uranus here, so he's getting that his mind, his inner mind, his moon is taking on a lot of the Uranian qualities in a nice way. He's got the Scorpio ascendant like me, and very late degree, but like he had they talk about the Scorpio stare. Well, he has he actually fashioned the Lydon stare, which was completely independent of astrology, but he had this really intense stare with the bug eyes. But he credits that to spinal meningitis when he was a kid, which left him with a spinal curve, and that's why Sid Vicious said he was hunchback. But it gave him this really intense look, I guess. And oh, by the way, I should say this chart is rectified from Astro Theme, so it's not 100% accurate that we know of. Like this is the best we got, and I just want to say that, but it seems pretty accurate. Scorpio ascendant, yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense, especially with the Uranus and Scorpio influence and the punk rock, era. And Saturn is in Sag, but it's right, basically conjunct the ascendant, and it's staring down his ascendant ruler Mars. Saturn and Mars, I have that in the 10th house in Leo. It's not an easy thing because Mars is his ascendant ruler. So if Saturn is conjuncting your ascendant ruler, even by 10, 11 degrees, it's still influential. I mean, I would challenge anyone who thinks that you can't have a conjunction at 11 degrees. His is at 10, mine's at 11. It's just not true. It's not true. Like I have empirical evidence. I've lived it my whole life. But anyway, Saturn conjunct the ascendant ruler, especially if it's Mars, is going to create a lot of frustration, a lot of aggression, a lot of anger, because Saturn is authority, Saturn is older people, Saturn is bullying, Saturn is control, Saturn is limitation. This is coming from both inside and out. It's both himself being scared and telling himself he can't do it, to other people actually bullying him, keeping him down, limiting him, trying to control him. I experienced that plenty. And what happens is that, especially with Scorpio ascendant, Mars becomes very aggressive and angry, and it has to bust out of Saturn's control. And eventually it just learns to, whatever authority is bearing down on it, Mars just pushes out from that control and just, fuck you. Like, I'm not going to do whatever you're telling me to do. And it rebels. and then it gains a lot of strength in that rebellion, because it has to be strong to bust out of the control of the Saturnian restriction. So he became strong and angry, and just look at his chart. Look how many squares there are. And squares are depends what's the square to. Like squares to the moon, that's not so great, because then it really messes with the mind. Squares to Mercury, also potentially not so great, because it equally can mess with the mind. But squares to other planets, I mean, especially ones that can handle it better, like Saturn or Mars, or even Jupiter or Pluto, they create a lot of fighting spirit, a lot of aggression, a lot of hard work. That's evident with the whole punk rock movement with Johnny Rotten. He needs those squares, otherwise he's going to write pretty music. He's just going to write pretty music about flowers and sunshine and butterflies and kissing girls, and that's not at all what we want from punk rock, right? We want that aggression. We want that the ferocity. We want that rawness, right? That they weren't even good musicians and nobody cared. Like they didn't have to be. They just had to have the spirit, the right attitude. That's what they had. They actually got rid of a bassist before Sid Vicious because he was too like he was too normal. He was a normie. He wanted to, you know, he liked the Beatles and not that there's anything wrong with that. I liked the Beatles at one point too, but it did not fit the image and they got rid of him and he was a better bassist than Sid Vicious. But Sid Vicious had the look, he had the attitude, and he was just like, you know, he looked like, I don't know, something out of a horror B movie or I don't know. He looked punk rock, right? And that's what they needed. They needed that more than they needed a really skilled bassist. It wasn't about like being really talented musicians. It was about the attitude. It was about the look. It was about the rebellion, and it was about the creativity. And they had that. They had that. You know, really powerfully. So this is really intense. I mean, right in his first house, it's in Sag, but it's very strong. You know, Mars in the first house, Mars and Saturn in the nodes. The nodes don't get activated till later in life, but they're in Gemini in the seventh house, and that's great for performing. That's great for popularity, for being recognized. You know, just being on stage, because this is the house of others. It's the house of the masses, right? And then we see this exalted Venus, right? It's in the third house technically, but moving into the fourth house because it's pretty much conjuncting the IC. So exalted Venus is beauty, fashion, style. But then we see these two strong squares between with the nodes. Squares to the nodes indicate something sort of destined or in the way of destiny. Like you could say that, and it's another way of saying like North Node is where he's being drawn to, but he's got to deal with this Venus. So what it comes down to is that there is at a certain point in a person's life with squares to the nodes, they're met with some seemingly fated issue dealing with that planet and the sign and house. And very much we get that, like Venus, and it's exalted Venus in the third, fourth house. So like there's something about his the style, beauty, fashion, creativity of his home, you know, fourth house, I see home, homeland, neighborhood, third house, that is destined, right? I mean, that's perfect, right? Because even before he was in the Sex Pistols, he had the Johnny Rotten look, right? He was a punk rock. I mean, punk rock was born before the Sex Pistols were born. It's just that they fit the bill. So when Malcolm McLaren went over, he saw the New York scene, he went to England, and he's like, he wanted to bring punk rock to England. He was like, he found punk rockers, you know, basically is what it was. You know, Johnny Rotten, Sid Vicious, they were already squatters dressing like, you know, sewer rats, and they had the hair and the jacket, the style, the whole thing, the attitude that matched. Apparently it was exalted. It's an exalted Venus. This is a Venus in Pisces. So it wasn't just like this shitty look. It was actually a very, you know, high creativity of his homeland, of his neighborhood. This is all about home, neighborhood fashion. So there, you know, that's being destined here. And Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, along with Neptune. But Jupiter is very high here in Leo, ninth house, conjunct Pluto. And this is very prominent because Leo is fame, recognition, you know, ego. It's all about the self, the individuation of the ego and the kingship. It's also about government, Leo. So when Jupiter and Pluto are together, Jupiter is expanding the Pluto's really giving a lot of depth and power and integrity to Jupiter. So Pluto is, you know, Leo representing government, Pluto's destruction. So, you know, anarchy, right? Destruction. These are all punk rock values. of the government, anti-government, anti-power, anti-authority. Jupiter being that he is the leader, he's the teacher, he's the one delivering the message in a positive way. It wasn't, punk rock wasn't negative. Punk rock appeared negative, but it was very positive because it was about the betterment of society. It was about something true and just, because, you know, liberty is, you know, we see like balance and, you know, Libra holds the scales of justice, right? And Pluto is in Libra. So it's about a real justice, not a superficial fake bullshit justice. It's like, you know, that's really, you know, if you're too scared of punk rock to ever dive into it, you're never going to understand what they were, you know, yelling and screaming about. But it was about real justice that they wanted. And that was the true core of punk rock. It was about, you know, how people, the common man, the working class, they were all suffering. And it wasn't that socialism was the answer, as like Marx said. It was that the governments were the problem, the governments itself, you know, and they wanted anarchy. They wanted to rule themselves because they thought they could do a much better job, and I agree, than the government could if they just were left alone. And you know, they wanted, the punk rock solution was to, you know, let's all help each other. And community was very popular in punk rock ideology, not communism, community itself, which is very different, right? So anyway, he's like this punk teacher, right? Because Jupiter, Pluto, expanding the philosophy of destruction. I am an anarchist. The philosophy of destruction, Pluto and Jupiter in Leo, of destroying the government, of anarchy, right? This is very anarchistic here. And then the square, we get this great square to Saturn, authority, right? Anarchy against authority. And, you know, that's very, very prominent. Let's not forget this Neptune. And here Neptune is stationary, right? 2 seconds per day. That's very, very slow. No out of bounds planets, but this incredibly slow Neptune. So that Neptune is going to be extremely powerful. And that's making a square to Uranus and Mercury. So bringing in a lot of that creativity, very highly creative. They had to be creative. They were starting something completely new. Like punk rock wasn't a thing. It was a thing in New York, but it wasn't, they invented it. They were part of the invention. They weren't the only ones. It happened simultaneously, if anything, you know, in New York and London. New York might have had a, you know, taken the first steps toward punk rock, but London, the London scene was also very, very integral. And in fact, it made it more popular. It really blew it up in London. You know, the initial steps were taken in New York. London, the London punk scene really popularized punk rock for the whole world. So it's no small feat. I mean, I don't, you know, they had this argument. I saw it on, you know, on TV. All the old punk rockers were arguing where punk rock started. They can just all share it because it, you know, it takes more than one. It takes, you know, it's different bands, different styles, different countries, you know. Anyway, Neptune is highly creative. It's in Scorpio at 0 degrees. 0 degrees planets always go to extreme lengths. So this very powerful creativity influencing, squaring this Uranus and Mercury. So like this intense T-square, right? And we don't want like tons of pretty trines and sextiles, even though he's got some to his moon. So he's essentially like, the moon's well taken care of, even though it's in Virgo, which is very, very picky and critical. Generally, he's a content guy. He's not unhappy. He's not suicidal. He's not going to, you know, kill himself, drink himself to death, anything like that, like some other people have and did. But he's going to be very aggressive, very intense, fighting always with all these squares, you know, but highly creative at the same time. And he didn't just stop with the Sex Pistols. He had another band, Public Image Limited. They did not have nearly the influence that the Sex Pistols have. Sex Pistols were one of the most influential bands of all time in modern music, right? They were hugely influential, but he himself was very, very creative. What else? We also have this North Node conjunct Mars, Mars being his ascendant ruler. And that is really intense. It wasn't in the Sex Pistols days, because the early days were more influenced by the South Node in Gemini in the 7th house, which is more about the others, the crowd, the relationships, speaking, singing to the crowd. North Node conjunct Mars is incredibly, I guess, like egotistical in a sense, because it's expanding his ascendant ruler. Whatever North Node touches, it really like expands in a very obsessive, unrealistic, materialistic way. It's considered a malefic, but it can benefit for materialism, for worldly gains. And here it's his ascendant lord, so it's a representative of his self. And in the 1st house, I have North Node in the 1st house, but it's not conjunct my ascendant lord. But this if you ever seen him in modern, like as an adult, like past age 40, he's arrogant as hell. Like he's cocky and confident, like to the point of like, oh my God, shut up, John Lydon. Just like you're overbearing, you're too dominant, you're just like arrogant, and you don't let anyone else, you don't share anything. That's North Node conjunct his ascendant ruler Mars, which is aggressive, in the 1st house in Sagittarius. I mean, I applaud him because he has his integrity. He's not like a dumb socialist, like idiot, like, oh, we should give all our power to the government, they'll take care of us. Like, just shut up. Like, just go lay down somewhere and keep your mouth closed, because those people are just too stupid to, like, just don't, like, they don't deserve any airtime at all. He understands, he's a smart guy. He understands the problem, that the governments are the problem. They literally are the problem that we are facing. They're all trying to make us, all the people of the whole world, slaves. They want to enslave all of humanity. The governments are in collusion. They're in collusion with big corporations too. So if you think corporations are the problem, yeah, I agree, because they're all just a revolving door of power, right? And that's not capitalism. That's just, bullshit corruption. You can't blame communism is even worse. I mean, come on. But anyway, he's not a dummy. He's a smart guy. He understands the problem, but he's just overbearing. Like, and that's this North Node conjunct Mars. Like he sucks all the oxygen out of the room. Like you can't have anyone else in the room with him, because that the aggressive Mars is being like blown up by this North Node, and that's his ascendant ruler. He's just going to dominate. So he just needs his own spotlight, his own, microphone. Give him his, interviews are great for, that kind of thing, but not like debates, not like, he'll just piss everyone off and just try and suck all the oxygen out of the air. Anyway, good thing he did not have that when he was younger, because that just would have been too much ego, too much self-influence going on there. But this pretty much, John Lydon, it's what we'd expect. Incredibly aggressive with all these squares, but like really super smart, very rebellious, and he's got his head in the right place. He's still for the people. He's still a good guy. He's for all the people. I've been following through the years. He's consistent. He says, no matter what, there's no exceptions. He's always like, I don't like the government. I like the people. I'm for the people. And he doesn't switch his opinion about when it comes to like certain countries. Like some people, if you talk about Israel, they get all like weird, like single out Israel out of all the other countries. No, the Israeli government, sucks. The Israeli people are as good as any other people anywhere, right? So stuff like that. Like, I mean, it's good to have a smart guy, and he's a smart guy. So that's John Lydon. He's like, one of the fathers of punk rock, and it's very obvious in this chart. So I appreciate him. I'm grateful for John Lydon, for Johnny Rotten, for what he's done. It's a great service to humanity, I think. So anyway, that's it for now, guys. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. You can go to my website, macroastrology.com, to book a reading. And You know, if you want me to cover anyone else, write that in the comments and I will if I can. And I will see you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.